In starting a project, all of my work starts off with an emotive feeling about it has to come from another place, and if it doesn't come from another place, which is from my old people, then I won't make anything. With the last work that I did, which is called Portrait of a Man, I was invited by John Mundine to be a part of a group project called Bungaree's Farm. So it was the second incarnation of the Bungaree project. And when we were at the residency, we were sitting around talking about this man Bungaree, and the kinds of things that I picked up from this conversation was that all of these attributes that either Bungaree possessed or were prescribed to him were attributes that are prescribed to all Aboriginal people at some degree post-colonisation. And Bungaree was known as the first Australian. There were more portraits painted of Bungaree than all of the governors put together. Bungaree circumnavigated Australia with Flinders twice. So some of the kinds of labels that were prescribed to him were leader, diplomat, ambassador, sellout, coconut, drunk, so many different things. It can just go on and on and on. So as we're sitting there having these conversations, all I could see was that within this one man's life as the first Australian, he exhibited every single quality that we are all prescribed to post-colonisation. And within that, I started to see that a lot of those behaviours were represented through physical objects. And then I realised that I had to do a still life as a portrait. I knew that if I was to research still life and how objects were represented in still life, that would interfere with my creativity. So I couldn't allow for me to left brain what the meaning of different things were within the history and canon of still life. So what I did was just learn about the man and do a lot more reading about Bungaree. And there was a whole bunch of objects that I knew that I needed to be able to locate within this particular still life. Things like a compass, because he had circumnavigated Australia. He was given back some land and he grew peaches. He had a peach farm, so I knew I had to put peaches in there. He used to run around with like just the colonial hat on or just the jacket on. He's such an amazing negotiator. Like when he was in Flinders' boat and he was travelling around Australia, they would get off the boat and try to engage with the local Aboriginal people, and even though he couldn't speak their language, he would take these colonial clothes off and they could see that as a naked man he was an Aboriginal person, so he managed to be able to negotiate some kind of communication with them. Process is a major factor of my practice. So the current project that I'm working on is a 7-tiered installation for a group exhibition at 4A Gallery. So it's layered memories of a ceremony, a cultural ceremony that I was in. And it's like the 7 stages that I had gone through to go from one ceremony to another ceremony. There's a lot of different objects that I used within the installation, and those objects reference the different experiences that I went through in between those 2 ceremonies. I went and did Aboriginal studies at a bunch of different colleges, and then went and did a law degree, or half of a law degree, and went through a lot of cultural business and have done a lot of healing and stuff. So all of those, the period in between 27 and now 35, or last year 34, was really about learning about how to follow my kurumpa, my feelings, and not use the power of my intellect, because the intellect is like an afterthought. I see things in pictures, in images, a smell, the way that somebody looks. I might hear a word. There's a whole bunch of different ways in which that I could potentially receive the impetus to get the creativity. I just got this overwhelming feeling that I was to talk about this ceremony that I was in, and without left braining it, even though it's like a natural thing to always question it, like I did question it, because that ceremony is a really personal private cultural story that I didn't know whether I was actually allowed to share or not. But knowing that I had that feeling that it came for me to share it, then that's what I would go by to be able to share it. So that particular ceremony was when I was 25, and I held some white sulphur-crested cockatoo feathers in one hand and some currawong feathers in the other hand, and the chakras in my hands opened and light come from my hands. And the only time I'd ever seen anything that was kind of like that before was with Mary, kind of religious iconography. And in the instance, and I heard my grandmother, a lady that I've never met before, from the Nurrumbang, which is a Wiradjuri word for like the other world, the dreaming. So I could hear my grandmother as plain as day, and this is a lady that I've never met before, but I knew that it was my nan. I could hear her say, when you wash yourself of your impurities, you'll receive your gift. The problems that I had were essentially being overconsumed by all of the trappings of Western culture and white society. Drugs, alcohol, sex, shopping, greed, lust, anger, envy, all of these kinds of things. And I knew that those were the things that I needed to absolve myself of those kind of behaviours. And this is like a really new work for me. So I find most often that because of the process that I employ, it's not until after the work's made that I can actually really articulate what the work's about. And it's doing the justice to the story, which is the most important thing. And then once that story is articulated, then it's within the physical manifestation of that story, which would therefore be the art or the object or the installation. Then it's almost like I'm viewing it for the first time. In regards to assessing whether something worked or whether something didn't work, once I've made it and it's out there, I don't know so much about how important it is for me to know whether something worked or didn't work, because the actual act of making the work is the important thing. And if it resonates within me that work has been made in the correct manner, in the proper way, in the right way, then it might not be the time for it to go to another show. It might not be the time for somebody to buy it, but I've carried that story in the proper way. And then in this instance, so for me culturally, that storytelling essentially is what I major in. And that happens in a purely conceptual way, where any medium is the medium that does the story the most amount of justice. I think that the advice that I would give to anyone that wanted to be an artist as coming straight from high school is the same advice I would give to anyone about wanting to do anything in their life, and that is to have conviction about what you're doing. For me, when I was going through a lot of cultural business, and after I had dropped out of my law degree and I'd actually started doing painting at Eora, which is an Aboriginal art college in Redfern. It's Aboriginal college, but I did Aboriginal art there. I was doing a lot of volunteering in the community in some of the other legal and international human rights stuff that I do on the side. But I didn't have a paid job for 2 years. So I'm paying for that now because I still needed to be able to survive. But I had conviction in knowing that I was learning the things that I needed to learn in order to be able to actually capacitate wherever I was going.